Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Right. And today we're getting into some really challenging stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, imagine for a second that a local politician, right, goes on television to just brag about this citizen in his district. And this citizen, according to the politician, is the ultimate hero of justice. Why? Because the citizen just turned his own father into the police for stealing.
Right, which, in our modern world, we'd probably applaud that guy.
Totally. We'd call him impartial, brave, a true defender of the law. But 2,500 years ago, an ancient philosopher heard that exact same story. And he warned that this so-called hero was actually participating in the destruction of human society.
Yeah, it's a massive paradigm shift.
It really is. So today we are stripping away the superficial layers of how we think about ethics, leadership, success. We are looking at the absolute bedrock of human character. We're diving into Books XIII through XVI of the Analects, the collected teachings of Confucius.
And we really want to stress that we aren't here for a dry history lecture.
No, not at all. We are extracting a radically different operating system for your life, your career, and your daily interactions.
And that operating system is profoundly necessary right now. Because the anxieties we face today, about corrupt leaders, fragile social structures, our own personal integrity, they're the exact same anxieties the students in this text were wrestling with.
Which is kind of wild to think about, that human nature just hasn't changed.
It hasn't. And this section of the Analects, it doesn't offer life hacks. It offers a complete structural alternative to the manipulative approaches to success that dominate so much of our modern conversation. I mean, it demands that we view virtue not as a luxury, but as literally the only reliable foundation when the world around you is entirely unreliable.
Yeah, and going into this, I really expected this material to be full of, dusty, mystical pronouncements. Yeah. But getting into the text, the author is surprisingly blunt.
Oh, he is incredibly blunt.
He's completely out of patience with the corrupt leadership of his day. Like in Book 13, Chapter 20, a student asks him to assess the people currently running the government, and his response, he literally says, "Pooh, they are so many pecks and hampers, not worth being taken into account."
Which is just a great insult.
It is. He's basically calling the politicians of his era a bunch of empty buckets. He has zero respect for people who hold high titles but possess low character.
Exactly. And it reveals the intense realism of his worldview. I mean, he is entirely unimpressed by wealth or positional power if it isn't anchored in a deeply cultivated personal character.
Right.
He guarantees his students that focusing on internal virtue is the only way to navigate an unpredictable world. But to understand the mechanics of why he places such an absolute premium on character over strategy, we have to look at the environment he was operating in.
Which was a total mess. It's a total mess. He was not teaching in a peaceful, prosperous society. He was living inside a slow-motion systemic collapse.
Let's talk about that environment, because if you read the text without the context, he sounds like an idealist sitting in an ivory tower telling people to just, be good. In reality, he's surviving a nightmare.
He's in the trenches.
Yeah. Book 16, Chapter 3 mentions that the revenue of the state has left the ducal house for 5 generations.
And that detail about the revenue is critical.
Because it means they're broke.
Right, exactly. It means the central government has been functionally bankrupt for a century. The text outlines this terrifying cascade of declining authority. So when a society functions correctly, decisions about ceremonies, music, military expeditions, they come from the central authority.
But that's not happening here.
No. In his world, the emperor lost control to the princes. Then the princes lost control to the great officers. And now the power is held by subsidiary ministers. The chain of command has completely dissolved into warlordism. Okay, let's build a modern analogy for this so we can really picture it. Imagine you work for a massive global corporate holding company, right? On paper, there's a CEO and a board of directors.
Right.
But in reality, the CEO hasn't had access to the company bank accounts in a decade. The regional vice presidents went rogue years ago, and they just run their own fiefdoms.
Oh, it's such a good analogy.
But it gets worse, right? Because the middle managers underneath those VPs are currently orchestrating hostile takeovers of their own departments. Everyone is paranoid, resources are hoarded, and the actual mission of the company has been replaced by just this brutal daily war for leverage.
That translates the political landscape of the era perfectly. And we see the brutal consequences of this breakdown directly in the text. Like in Book 16, Chapter 1, the head of the powerful Qi family, who is a subordinate minister, right? He plans an unprovoked military attack on a smaller allied territory called Chuanyu simply to consolidate his own power.
Wow. Just outright aggression from middle management.
Exactly. And in Book 14, Chapter 22, the text mentions Chan Sheng murdering Duke Qin of Qi.
So a middle manager literally assassinating the CEO?
Precisely. The leaders are paranoid, they're violently ambitious, and they're focused entirely on aggressive expansion to protect themselves.
And so in the middle of this total chaos, we have this recurring cast of students, right? Guys like Zilu, Zikeng, and Fan Qi. And they keep peppering their teacher with questions about government or how to be an officer.
Yeah, they're constantly asking for career advice.
It clicked for me when I realized what they're actually doing. These are ambitious young men trying to figure out how to build a career in a completely volatile, unpredictable job market.
Absolutely, they are.
They are basically asking, how do I get promoted when the whole system is unstable? How do I serve a corrupt boss without losing my mind?
They want tactical advice. They want a playbook for maneuvering through a broken system, but the answer they receive is a radical pivot inward.
Right. He doesn't give them a strategy guide.
No, he refuses to give them a playbook for political manipulation. Instead, he teaches them that when external systems break down, the only thing you can rely on, and the only thing that provides true leverage, is your own cultivated character. He forces them to look at the foundation rather than the facade.
And that inward pivot, it leads to a massive distinction in the text. He divides the way people handle this chaotic world into two archetypes, the superior man and the mean man.
And we really need to define those terms carefully because the English translation carries a lot of baggage.
Yeah, superior sounds arrogant and mean sounds like a playground bully.
Exactly. But superior man does not mean someone inherently better by birth or someone who acts arrogantly. It refers to a person of cultivated moral excellence, someone who has done the rigorous work to align their character with virtue.
Got it.
And the mean man doesn't mean a cruel person. Mean here implies petty, uncultivated, or small-minded. It's the person entirely reactive to their environment, driven by immediate gain and the opinions of others.
Okay, and the text actually gives us a diagnostic tool to figure out which archetype we are operating under. It's in Book 15, Chapter 20. It says, "What the superior man seeks is in himself. What the mean man seeks is in others."
That's the core metric right there.
It really comes down to the location of your compass. Is it internal or external? I mean, if you are constantly seeking validation, status, or, looking for someone else to blame when things go wrong, you are outsourcing your identity to a chaotic world. You are operating as the mean man.
Yes. Because if you are seeking validation from a deeply corrupt society, you will inevitably adopt that corruption to please it. You'll just bend to broken rules.
Which guarantees a bad outcome.
Right. The trajectory of these two mindsets is laid out in Book 14, Chapter 24. The progress of the superior man is upwards. The progress of the mean man is downwards. Relying on external validation in a broken world guarantees a downward spiral into compromise.
I really want to see how this plays out in a modern workplace, because I think we've all worked for both of these archetypes at some point. Book 13, Chapter 25 gives us an incredible metric for leadership. It says the superior man is easy to serve and difficult to please, while the mean man is difficult to serve and easy to please.
That phrasing is so brilliant. Let's break down the mechanics of it. What makes the superior man easy to serve?
Well, the text explains that the superior man uses people according to their actual capacity. He maps out your specific skill set and bounds your responsibilities to ensure you can actually achieve excellence.
He sets you up to win.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He creates a fair, predictable environment where you know exactly what the goals are. That makes him easy to serve. But he is difficult to please because he demands righteous effort. You cannot flatter him.
Right. The work has to be good.
Yeah, if you hand in lazy work and try to schmooze him to cover it up, he sees right through it.
And the mean man in leadership is the exact inverse of that. He is difficult to serve because he employs men wishing them to be equal to everything. He basically projects his own chaotic anxieties onto his team.
Oh man, I've had that boss.
We all have. He expects you to be a marketing expert, a financial whiz, and a flawless administrator all at once. His expectations are impossible and constantly shifting.
Yeah.
But he is easy to please because his compass is entirely external. He lacks internal principles. So if you play office politics, flatter his ego, or agree with his terrible ideas, he will be pleased regardless of your actual performance.
We all know that boss. The mean man boss is the one who texts you at 11 p.m. on a Sunday, completely disorganized, expecting you to fix a crisis outside your department. He's impossible to serve.
Yep, completely reactive.
But if you walk in on Monday and tell him his new car is amazing, he gives you the best shifts. He's incredibly easy to please. Whereas the superior man boss is the demanding mentor who gives you crystal clear objectives, sets you up with the right tools, but holds you to a relentless standard of quality.
Which really forces the listener to conduct a rigorous self-examination. If you manage a team, run a project, or parent a child, which environment are you creating? Are you providing predictable, fair parameters based on capacity, or are you projecting your own unmanaged anxieties onto the people relying on you?
That's a tough question to ask yourself.
It is. But if the superior man is grounded in internal virtue, that internal state must manifest in external actions. And according to this philosophy, the very first place that internal virtue hits the real world is in our use of language.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because if the world is a corrupt mess and I've decided to fix my internal compass, what is literally the first thing I do when I wake up tomorrow? Where does an internal compass meet the external world? In Book XIII, Chapter 3, his student Zelu asks essentially that. He says, the ruler of Wei wants you to help administer the government. What is the very first thing you will do? Confucius answers, what is necessary is to rectify names.
The rectification of names. This stands as one of the most challenging and vital concepts in the entire text.
And his student thinks he's lost his mind. Zelu replies, you are wide of the mark. Why must there be such rectification? And honestly, I relate to the student here.
It sounds absurd on the surface.
Yeah. You are walking into a government dealing with impending wars, starving citizens, systemic corruption, and your first executive action is to act like a dictionary editor. It sounds completely disconnected from reality.
It only sounds disconnected until you follow the terrifying step-by-step logic of societal collapse that Confucius outlines in response.
Right.
He lays out a mechanical cascade. He says, if names be not correct, language is not in accordance with the truth of things. That is the initial fracture. A disconnection between the vocabulary we use and the reality we are experiencing.
Then the fracture spreads. If language be not in accordance with the truth of things, affairs cannot be carried on to success. Because how can a team fix a problem if the culture refuses to accurately name the problem?
Exactly. And the cascade accelerates. When affairs cannot be carried on to success, proprieties in music will not flourish. Now, proprieties in music represent the cultural fabric, the shared rituals, trust, and harmonious interactions that bind a community together.
The culture of the organization, basically.
Yeah, yes. When operations continually fail because language is false, culture decays. Then he says, when proprieties in music do not flourish, punishments will not be properly awarded. The justice system breaks down. Without shared truth in culture, the law devolves into a tool for the powerful to punish the vulnerable.
And it ends with paralysis. He says, when punishments are not properly awarded, the people do not know how to move hand or foot. Complete systemic anxiety.
Absolute paralysis.
Let's look at how this cascade happens today. What happens when a corporation initiates a massive layoff to preserve the CEO's bonus, but the executive team sends out a memo calling it a strategic right-sizing or a synergistic realignment?
That's a perfect example. They're refusing to rectify the name.
They are using sanitized jargon to hide a brutal reality.
And the results perfectly mirror the ancient prediction. Affairs cannot be carried on to success because trust evaporates. The employees left behind know the language is false, so they stop trusting the leadership. The proprieties of the workplace, the loyalty, the mutual respect, the psychological safety are destroyed.
Oh, true.
Or consider the broader social scale. When we label highly polarized, outrage-generating entertainment as news, or when we define a stranger who clicks a button on a screen as a friend, we dilute our grip on reality.
Which is why Book 15, Chapter 26 warns, specious words confound virtue, and Book 14, Chapter 21 adds, he who speaks without modesty will find it difficult to make his words good.
What's fascinating here is that Confucius views linguistic precision not as a grammatical issue, but as a deeply moral one. A society, a company, or a family that lies to itself in its vocabulary guarantees its own operational failure.
Wow.
If you cannot call incompetence incompetence, if you cannot call theft theft, you cannot solve the issue. Restoring order to a chaotic environment requires demanding that language reflects reality.
So if we commit to aligning our words with reality and building that internal compass, how do we practically apply this to our daily lives? Because the text provides these frameworks for daily living, and I really want to walk through them.
Let's do it.
In Book 15, Chapter 23, a student asks for a single word that can serve as a rule of practice for one's entire life. The answer is reciprocity, but it's defined in the negative. He says, "What you do not want done to yourself, do not do to others."
This is often referred to as the silver rule, contrasting with the positively phrased golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The psychological difference between those two approaches is massive.
Yeah, the positive formulation can actually become quite invasive, right? It assumes that what I desire is what everyone else desires.
Exactly.
It leads to an aggressive kind of helpfulness where I project my preferences onto you. Like if I want people to give me constant feedback, I might constantly critique my coworkers, assuming I'm being helpful.
But the negative formulation, the silver rule, is rooted in boundary setting and deep empathy. It requires you to consider your own aversions, your own pain, and your own boundaries, and then strictly refrain from inflicting those experiences on anyone else. It establishes a baseline of non-harm.
And what if we shifted our daily interactions to focus on this negative space of empathy? Instead of proactively trying to fix your family members with unsolicited advice because that's what you would want, what if you simply ensured you never spoke to them in a tone you would hate receiving?
That's a huge shift.
Or what if you never withheld information at work the way you hate being kept in the dark? It is a profoundly respectful, less intrusive way to move through the world.
It really is. And it creates the necessary psychological safety for any true trust to develop.
Okay, so that's the first practice. What's next?
The second framework shifts from our outward behavior to our inward preparation, specifically regarding the environment we cultivate. In Book 15, Chapter 9, Zigong asks about the practice of virtue. He's given a pragmatic metaphor. A mechanic who wishes to do his work well must first sharpen his tools.
I love this part. The text explains that your tools are your community. When you are living in any state, take service with the most worthy among its great officers and make friends of the most virtuous among its scholars. Your environment is the whetstone for your character.
This acknowledges human vulnerability. The text emphasizes the internal compass, but it never claims we're immune to our surroundings. If you try to cultivate virtue while entirely surrounded by cynical, shallow, or corrupt people, your tools will inevitably become blunt.
Yeah, you can't out-willpower a toxic environment forever.
No, you can't. And Book 16, Chapter 4 explicitly warns against injurious friends. Friendship with the man of specious airs, friendship with the insinuatingly soft, and friendship with the glib-tongued.
The insinuatingly soft and the glib-tongued, that is the office gossip who violently agrees with everything you say to your face, but undermines you the moment you leave the room.
Exactly.
Or it's the friend who enables your worst habits because agreeing with you is easier than challenging you. Compare that to the advantageous friends the text lists. The upright, the sincere, the man of much observation.
Yes.
So if you audit your inner circle right now, are you sharpening your tools against the upright and sincere, or are your tools rusting because you're surrounded by the glib-tongued?
Conducting that environmental audit is crucial, which leads us directly to the third practical framework, the most comprehensive tool for self-audit in the text. Book 16, Chapter 10, gives us the 9 considerations of the superior man.
9 of them.
9. This is a rigorous mindfulness practice from antiquity, listing 9 specific areas where the cultivated person applies deliberate thought.
Let's actually walk through these because the psychology behind them is incredible. The first 2. In regard to the use of his eyes, he is anxious to see clearly. In regard to the use of his ears, he is anxious to hear distinctly.
Now, seeing clearly isn't about eyesight. It's about piercing through cognitive biases. Are you seeing the situation as it is? Or are you seeing what your anxieties want you to see?
Oh, that's good.
And hearing distinctly is the practice of active listening. Most people do not listen. They simply wait for their turn to speak. The superior man considers whether he actually comprehended the nuance of what was said.
Right. Then it moves to presentation. In regard to his countenance, he is anxious that it should be benign. In regard to his demeanor, respectful. In regard to his speech, sincere.
Countenance is fascinating here. It's about the micro-expressions of leadership. If you walk into a room carrying stress in your face, that anxiety infects the entire team. Deliberately maintaining a benign countenance is an act of service to the people around you.
Wow, I never thought of my facial expression as a service to others.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And respectful demeanor and sincere speech ensure that your external presentation matches your internal reality.
Then it moves to action, doing business reverently and questioning doubts. But the last two are the ones that hit hardest today. Number 8. When he's angry, he thinks of the difficulties his anger may involve him in.
That is the practice of inserting a deliberate pause between stimulus and response. In our modern digital ecosystem, anger is incentivized. Reacting immediately is the norm.
Right. People love a hot take.
Exactly. But before you send a scathing email or post a furious comment, this consideration forces you to map out the secondary and tertiary consequences of that emotional outburst.
And the final consideration, number 9. When he sees gain to be got, he thinks of righteousness. Imagine how many corporate scandals, ruined reputations, or personal bankruptcies could have been avoided with that single sentence. You see an opportunity for profit, a shortcut, an insider tip, a deceptive marketing angle, and before you take it, you force yourself to evaluate if the mechanism of gain aligns with right conduct. If we picked just one of these 9 considerations to focus on for the next 24 hours, it would completely alter our interactions.
It absolutely would. However, we must be intellectually honest with our listeners.
Yeah, it's not all sunshine and easy quotes.
No, these practices sound incredibly appealing when listed as bullet points. But truly implementing them means crashing headfirst into deeply uncomfortable countercultural realities. The pursuit of this internal virtue will put you at odds with modern assumptions about justice, success, and loyalty.
Which brings us back to the hook we started the show with. We've talked about reciprocity and sincere speech, but then you hit a passage like Book 13, Chapter 18, and it feels like hitting a brick wall. It's the story of the sheep-stealing father.
This is notoriously difficult for modern readers to accept, but it is essential for understanding the underlying philosophy of the text.
Let's lay it out. The Duke of Xi is bragging to Confucius about the moral purity of his region. He says, "We have people who are so upright that if a father steals a sheep, his own son will bear witness against him to the authorities." The Duke thinks this is the ultimate flex of civic virtue.
Right, he thinks it's a triumph of objective law.
Yes. But Confucius completely disagrees. He says, where I come from, uprightness is different. The father conceals the misconduct of the son, and the son conceals the misconduct of the father. Uprightness is to be found in that.
It creates a profound culture clash for us today.
It really does, because to modern ears, this sounds like corruption, nepotism, or like a mob mentality. How on earth is lying to the authorities considered upright?
Well, modern listeners are raised in democracies with objective legal systems. We are taught that the ultimate arbiter of justice is the impartial state. The law applies equally to everyone, and our primary duty as citizens is to uphold that law, even if it means turning in our own family. But Confucius operates from a fundamentally different premise. He argues that the foundational node of society is not the individual citizen's relationship to the state, it is the family unit. The bond between parent and child is the root of all human trust, empathy, and social cohesion.
So if the state incentivizes you to betray your family, they are poisoning the well of human trust.
Precisely. If a state creates a legal environment where children are celebrated for betraying their parents to the authorities over a stolen sheep, the state is actively destroying the core fabric of human connection.
Oh, wow.
A society where family members routinely act as informants against each other is a totalitarian nightmare. It is a society devoid of fundamental loyalty, entirely reliant on fear of the state to function.
That paints a really dark picture of the Duke's flex.
It does. Confucius argues that if you bankrupt the trust within the family, no amount of perfectly executed state law can save the society from eventual collapse. Uprightness here is a profound loyalty to primary human bonds over abstract impersonal state laws.
It's a defense of the private sphere against the overreach of public authority. He's claiming true morality is deeply relational, not just legal. And, I mean, it makes us uncomfortable because it sounds like nepotism, but there is a messy human truth there.
There is.
If someone you deeply love makes a terrible mistake, your first instinct is to protect them and rehabilitate them privately. Your first instinct isn't to call a press conference to destroy their life for the sake of abstract legal justice.
Exactly. This tension between the internal relational world and the external public world exposes another massive obstacle highlighted in the text. Our motivation for self-improvement. Book 14, Chapter 25 states, "In ancient times, men learned with a view to their own improvement. Nowadays, men learn with a view to the approbation of others.
The approbation of others. If he thought the pursuit of external validation was bad 2,000 years ago, imagine his reaction to us today.
He would be horrified.
Our entire world is built on the architecture of external approbation. We carry devices that quantify the approbation of others in real time through metrics and likes. In the corporate world, our worth is quantified by public rankings and performance reviews.
Divorcing our growth and moral cultivation from external validation is incredibly difficult. If you are learning a new skill, reading a complex book, or trying to become more patient, are you doing it to actually improve the architecture of your own mind? Or are you doing it to update your resume, impress your peers, or signal your virtue to a crowd?
That's a gut punch.
The text warns that if your learning is inextricably tied to the applause of others, your virtue will remain superficial and fragile, because the crowd's applause is fickle.
We can extract massive value from this focus on relational loyalty and internal validation, but we also have to exercise critical thinking. We can't just adopt the entire ancient worldview without analyzing it, because the author assumes some social structures that we, frankly, fundamentally reject today.
This is the necessity of reading wisdom literature with discernment. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we must separate the timeless psychological insights from the historically limited sociological assumptions.
And the clearest example of this is the rigid class structure woven into the text.
Yes, the classism is very real.
In Book 16, Chapter 9, humanity is divided into 4 strict tiers. You have those born with knowledge at the highest level, then those who learn, then those who are dull but manage to learn anyway, and at the bottom, those who are dull and stupid and yet do not learn, they are the lowest of the people.
It is very deterministic.
And it gets intensely elitist. In Book 13, Chapter 4, a student named Fan Shu asks Confucius to teach him about farming. Confucius basically dismisses him, saying he isn't a farmer. And the moment the student leaves the room, Confucius calls him a small man, a mean man.
His rationale in that passage is that a true leader only needs to love propriety, righteousness, and good faith, and the common people will naturally submit and handle the manual labor. He assumes the superior man is entirely above the technical work of the working class.
See, I have to push back hard on that. That sounds like a modern tech CEO who has no idea how his own software is coded, sitting in an office dismissing the engineers as small men. It's the ultimate justification for an out-of-touch elite class that looks down on the people who actually keep society running.
It is an elite perspective, absolutely. It's rooted in the strictly stratified agrarian society Confucius lived in.
Yeah.
He assumed the division between the scholar official class and the peasant class was the natural order of the universe.
Right.
We absolutely must discard that sociological classism and his disdain for manual labor. But we have to look past the ancient snobbery to extract the core point he was making to his student.
Okay, so what is the timeless insight buried under that classism?
His point was that a leader's primary function is not technical micromanagement. It is moral gravity. If a leader creates a culture of profound trust, righteousness, and fairness, they will attract the best talent. The text says the people will come to him bearing their children on their backs.
Oh, meaning they'll want to work for him.
Exactly. The leader doesn't need to be the best farmer or the best coder if they possess the character required to effectively lead the people who are. We reject the elitism, but we retain the insight that leadership is fundamentally a moral exercise, not just a technical one.
Which brings us to how this highly pragmatic philosophy compares to other ethical systems we might be familiar with. Because the advice in this text is incredibly grounded. It deals with human nature exactly as it is, not as we wish it was.
Yes. It is a philosophy of active, engaged social realism, contrasting sharply with traditions focused on mystical detachment or unconditional universalism. Book 14, Chapter 36, provides a perfect comparative insight here.
Someone approaches Confucius and asks a question that sounds identical to teachings from the Christian or Buddhist traditions. They ask, "What do you say concerning the principle that injury should be recompensed with kindness?"
The classic turn the other cheek approach.
Right, meeting hatred with unconditional love. And Confucius flat out rejects it.
He answers with a profound counter-question that exposes the economic and moral flaw in that approach. He asks, "With what, then, will you recompense kindness?"
It is a brilliant logical trap. If someone betrays you, steals from you, or injures you, and you reward them with kindness, what currency do you have left to reward the person who actually treats you well?
Exactly. You have bankrupted the value of kindness by handing it to the wicked.
So what's his alternative?
He establishes a formula for practical justice, he says. Recompense injury with justice and recompense kindness with kindness. He believes in maintaining a moral economy based on fairness and proportionality.
That makes a lot of sense.
If you reward bad behavior with unearned kindness, you incentivize injury. You degrade the societal standard. Justice, meaning appropriate boundaries, consequences, and restitution, is the only moral response to injury. Kindness is a currency reserved for those who participate in the mutual exchange of goodwill.
We see that same intense practical realism applied to how a government must treat its people. In Book XIII, Chapter 9, Confucius is traveling, and he notes the large population. His driver asks, "Since they are thus numerous, what more shall be done for them?" Confucius answers, "Enrich them."
Make them prosperous.
Right. Ensure their material needs are met. The driver asks, "And when they have been enriched, what more shall be done?" Confucius replies, "Teach them."
Enrich them, then teach them. This ancient text perfectly anticipates the core insight of 20th century psychology, specifically Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, the pyramid.
Yes. You cannot preach advanced moral philosophy or complex proprieties to a starving population. If people are terrified about how they will feed their children or pay their rent, they do not possess the cognitive bandwidth to engage in the high-level cultivation of the superior man.
You have to deal with the reality of the world. People need food before they need lectures. Injuries require justice, not just warm feelings. And systemic chaos can only be fixed by individuals taking absolute, uncompromising responsibility for their own internal character.
And that individual responsibility is a relentless process. There is no finish line where the superior man declares himself perfect. It requires a constant, brutally honest auditing of one's actions, motivations, and inevitable failures.
Which brings us to the final provocative thought I want to leave you with today. As you navigate your career, your family dynamics, and your own internal growth, chew on this single sentence from Book 15, Chapter 29. The text says, "To have faults and not to reform them, this indeed should be pronounced having faults."
It's so direct.
The text is telling us that error itself is not the ultimate problem. We are all going to fail. We will all occasionally slip into the reactive anxieties of the mean man. We will all use specious words or lose our temper.
We're human.
Exactly. The true failure, the actual fault that destroys character, is stagnation. It is the prideful refusal to acknowledge the error and correct it. So as you go into your week, ask yourself, are you defining yourself by the inevitable mistakes you've made? Or are you defining yourself by your stubborn refusal to fix them?
It's a great question to reflect on.
That's the heart of the section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.